Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Genesis Block, where Sid and I today are going to talk to you about the concept of soulbound tokens as proposed by Vitalik Buterin in January on his blog, and then he released the paper alongside a couple of other folks a couple of months ago. So without any further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to Sid, who will explain the structure of his presentation, and then we'll just have a freewheeling debate around soulbound tokens, identity, and just the concept in general. So over to you, Sid.
All right, awesome. So let's just jump right into it. To give you some, idea of how I'm going to present. First, we'll just go over a quick history of how the whole concept of a soulbound came to be. A few definitions, right? Just understanding what they are specifically before we jump into, the broader context that soulbounds exist in, what they are trying to achieve, what the vision is. Um, and then we can jump into the specific use cases that soulbounds can potentially enable. And then we'll of course touch upon the pros and the cons of this new technology. And yeah, I think that's the broad structure we're going to follow, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us, right? So let's begin, right? So the whole concept of soulbounds actually comes from World of Warcraft. Uh, in the game, there is an item type called a soulbound, which basically allows the player uh, to opt to receive it, but once received, the player can't transfer it to anyone else, right? And it is the same underlying philosophy which has been transferred into Web3. Now, the whole concept of soulbounds in the game has made the game, at least this is what players of the game say, it's made it more fun, right? It's made it more competitive, it's made it less financially driven, in the sense people cannot just buy really superior assets in the game. So it's really, you have to become skilled at the game by playing it a lot, right? As opposed to just entering the game ecosystem, spending money to buy the really good assets, and then effectively just buying your way to the top, right? So this whole concept has been mirrored into Web3, at least in concept, um, in the form of NFTs, right? So we all know what NFTs are, right? Non-fungible tokens. But the the core differentiator between NFTs and even the broader blockchain ecosystem as a whole and Soulbounds is one of transferability, right? Blockchains are made so one can transfer anything to anyone. That's the whole argument, or not argument, but the whole belief in a user should do anything they want to do with their assets, right? Censorship resistance and so on and so forth, right? But Soulbound is specifically supposed to be designed for this non-transferability feature. So if I had to define it in the paper, even Siddharth alluded to earlier, right? It was written by Vitalik himself and two other folks. I'll just tell you who they are. Um, right? So there's Vitalik himself, then this other fellow named Glenn Weil. He's a PhD in economics from Princeton, and he currently works as a social technologist at Microsoft. Not too sure what that means, but it sounds pretty cool. And the last author was Pooja Olaver. She's a Stanford law grad and strategy counsel at Flashbots. Flashbots is pretty interesting as a company. They provide products and research in MEV, mine extractable value, which is a topic for another day. But anyway, so getting back to the definition. So this is how they defined it, right? They are essentially tokens, non-fungible tokens that are non-transferable, publicly visible or private, but possibly revocable by the issuer. And the last part, what that means is the issuer of such tokens can, if they choose to, take it away from after being issued, right? And another important term to keep in mind is what they call souls. Souls are essentially wallets that hold soul-bound NFTs. Okay, so these are the two, let's say, atomic units of the whole topic that we're going to discuss. And these soul-bound tokens or SBTs can be issued by anyone, really, in principle, right? It can be a company, it can be individual. For example, a university, right? An institution could issue an SPT to a student, and they would do that as a proxy for, let's say, a diploma, right? How diplomas issued today to students, or even let's say a conference like, say, like NFT NYC, right? Just happened today, recently. That organization could issue an SPT to attendants who have visited that conference to prove that this person has attended the conference, and since it's non-transferable, it else and someone who hasn't gone to the conference, right? But we'll get into the implications of SPTs just in a little bit. Essentially, what Soulbounds are trying to facilitate is identification of unique users. Okay, and this identification is trying to be achieved by using filters that are not financial, because as of now, the financial world essentially, right, and SPTs are try to unlock this other aspect, the other realm, a realm which is more social, right, the social layer of society onto crypto, Web3, etc., right? So I know these are pretty abstract concepts. We'll get into more examples further down. But one thing I'll touch upon before getting into the broader vision is how, at least right now, people are thinking through implementing these. This is not by any means happening in practice yet, and that's why I should also caveat that a lot of our discussion is going to be more on a theoretical basis on what can be rather than what is, and that's just because the technology is not at a stage where people can actually interact with it. There's no public proof of concept yet, essentially, right? But anyway, so there are a couple ways people are thinking through implementing these SBTs. One is, for example, just linking a regular NFT to an ENS name, right? Like an Ethereum, a .eth address or whatnot. There's another suggestion that's been going around is to implement SPTs using proof of humanity. Now, this also is pretty deep as a concept, but there is a whole protocol actually called proof of humanity, where they use a whole range of ways to actually prove that a human is a human. These ways can be as simple as a video call, someone just testifying on video call. There are other ways as well, and the way they enforce truth is by using other decentralized arbitration protocols, which we won't get into right now. But the point is, this is another way SPTs are being thought through and how they can be implemented, and there are a couple others, right? But the reason I'm not hitting on everyone is because this is all assumption. This is, no one knows what is the right way, the wrong way, and we could just spend an hour just talking about what are the possible implementations without really getting anywhere. So let's move on into what we know, right? And the one thing that is
just before that, just one thing. A question about the Soulbound tokens. So I don't know if you're going to touch upon this later on, but what if I am given a Soulbound token? Do I have an option to accept it or deny it? Like, for example, if someone creates a Soulbound token like NFT NYC, I know that I've attended NFT NYC, but they're going to be issuing a Soulbound token to me. Do I have the ability to accept or deny the airdrop, let's say, of that attendance scope or token into my wallet?
Right. So what you're touching upon is, in fact, one of a very core pillar of what how identity systems are being thought through in the world, which is, that agency to decide if you want to be identified with a particular organization, event,
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. Right now, to answer your question, the technology isn't there to say, decide to accept or reject. If someone soul drops you something like an airdrop, um, at least basis the research that I've done, soul drops, you cannot accept
I
or
mean,
reject.
I would assume that you could actually do that. That's just a design feature. It's not actually whether
Exactly.
it's possible or not. It's a design feature. So I think that that's important to talk about later as well as a design feature in itself, because that's a critical tenet of soulbound tokens. I think, and we need to explore that a little further because that's a very important part of what will distinguish, the soulbound tokens as they're written about and discussed today, and what they could end up becoming in the future with a variation of one of its core tenets. So yeah, sorry, I'll let you continue,
No,
but yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, and there are other such tenants. For example, what if you have a SBT, do you want to actually publicize it to everyone, or do you want to, for example, only reveal it when you're trying to use an application which requires you to reveal it, right?
Hmm.
So all these design features, what you're saying, um, they've been discussed, they are being discussed, but so far the whole idea of, being able to accept, reject, private, public, have not been hashed out yet in terms of how they're going to actually technically implement it. But this is akin to the whole SBT concept as a whole. But everything is being figured out. But you're right. This is an important part, and which is being rightfully, has been rightfully identified by other people, right? So just moving on to really give you an idea of the broader context of what Soulbounds are trying to achieve, right? So like I mentioned, it's there are a lot of like I mentioned earlier, was that a lot of crypto is, or most of crypto really is intertwined with the financial world. But to really unlock, let's say, the like another whole realm of applications, you need to get identity into the equation, essentially, right? Because a lot of what exists in the offline world is based on our social reputation, our social relationships with other people, and that cannot be expressed uh, on chain right now, right? So what Soulbounds are trying to really enable is create a robust mechanism for identity reputation. That is the very fundamental goal of Soulbounds, right? And it is very early. So I mean, there's no denying it. That's why a lot of technical questions that you might have will have ambiguous answers. Um, but the end goal, assuming all of this, evolves into something um, which which fulfills the promises that they're promising right now, is what the authors are calling decentralized society. Now, what that means, at least to me, right, is is decentralizing every layer of society. So we've decentralized, not we haven't decentralized, but we're en route to decentralizing, say, the financial um, substrate. Now, society, us being social animals, has a very fat social layer as well, right? Which a lot is dependent upon. And once we are able to decentralize that, is what the authors are trying to are referring to as decentralized society, right? They mentioned that, I mean, this is once again just promises, but it's also trying to move the whole crypto perception away from hyperfinancialization, and trying to get it, which NFTs already are doing, but trying to get it more relatable to, let's say, the mainstream audience, right? To onboard the next billion users, or potentially all users, all people in the world, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, they use the phrase decentralized society, or DSOC, as a Cambrian explosion of political, social, and economic applications, right? So I mean, that's literally everything, everything that society does. So the vision is grand, um, but time will tell if it will actually be achieved, right? Um, so yeah, so that's decentralized society. Any questions on this particular concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the concept of the decentralized society is very interesting. I think that there's a lot of work obviously to be done if we get towards that space, but
Mhm.
also there's a very fundamental debate at the heart of it as well. And I think Bankless have spoken about this as well. You know, they had an episode with Vitalik talking about soulbound
Yeah,
tokens, and
yeah,
Evan McMullen from Disco.xyz.
yeah,
They had her on as well, right? And she talks a lot about verifiable credentials and DIDs, which decentralized identifiers, which are called DIDs, which make up verifiable credentials, right? So, and the concept basically comes down to, do you want the choice of the identity that is attached to you? So, for example, if I am, if I've attended like a rock concert or something like that, if I've attended, Metallica, and everyone goes, and I don't want anyone to know that because it's just like my side passion. I don't know. I'm just making something up here, but
yeah. No,
um,
you're right. People will make incorrect inferences about your personality based on their
exactly.
perception of your likes and dislikes.
Exactly. Like you can't, I mean, you don't want to get into a situation where just because you like something or dislike something, you're put into essentially a data set along with a lot of other people, and then inferences are made about you through that data set, right? I mean, you're more than the sum of your likes and dislikes. And that's at the core of the identity argument for me as well. So that's why I think that, firstly, all of this being stored on chain can be a bit of an issue, because you don't want everyone to be able to access every piece of information about you on chain. I mean, there is such a thing as privacy, and it's one of the biggest. It's one of the biggest things that people within this space focus on, and rightly so, right? Privacy is a very important aspect of it. But so in that instance, you don't want people to be able to access every piece of information about you on chain. And secondly, I mean, would that even be possible with the data requirements? I'm not sure, right? Like, I could be completely wrong about this, but wouldn't it take up a lot of block space and a lot of is essentially um, just just a lot of space and memory to be able to store every piece of information on chain. So I think that what and I've read about soulbound tokens and stuff a decent amount as well, and listened to the podcast and all of those things. And what my preference lies towards is having information stored off chain, and then you have you essentially have proof that that information is there off chain, on the blockchain. So that is an important that is an important thing to consider. And another thing that's important for me is that there needs to be a lot of the privacy angle built into this before it even gets close to being on the mainstream. So I think that something like zero knowledge proofs will play a very important role in this, because if you don't want all your information stored on chain, right? What you should be just having is like a kind of zero knowledge proof where where your reputation, for example, is you just get a reputation score based on the proof, essentially knowing all of those aspects of your identity and then creating a reputation based off of those, but not necessarily exposing what those identifiers are, right? So let's say that you like football, and you order stuff of Amazon like 20 times every 2 months or whatever. All of those things, like essentially those are these are very random things that I'm talking about. These
I
are,
think I
yeah.
think I understand what you're saying, and I think a better maybe an example of what you're saying is proving that you are. Let's take the example of lending, right? Or lending and borrowing. You want to prove that that you are credit worthy without really proving your claim, like,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. And that's, yeah, exactly, right. And the thing with all these reputation systems and identity systems is that at the end of the day, what they're going to be used for, they're going to be used for financial aspects, but they're also going to be used for community aspects.
Yep.
Right? Because like, let's say you're constructing a community and you're trying to find a group of like-minded people. you can use your reputational score to be able to join that community and gain, clout in that community, all those things. But also from a financial aspect, you want your reputation to guide how, the amount of collateral you have to put up for a loan, what sort of financial products you can access, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's very obvious where reputation and the financial aspect go hand in hand. So I think that the way to come up with that reputational score is the critical aspect at which, Vitalik and, Disco.xyz and all of those are touching upon. And it's all, again, like in this space, it's all trade-offs. The trade-offs are, do you want everything on chain versus off chain? Do you want, people to have more control over their data, or do you want to associate with them to who they actually are and what they've attended and what they've done and what they're part of? So I think Vitalik's view is a lot more pure in the sense that everything is on chain, everything is transparent, everyone knows everything, and I don't think that that's a wrong vision. I just think that I mean, and this is just a personal opinion, but for me, I don't think that I would go to any extremes in that aspect, and which is why, and I don't know if you're going to be talking about verifiable credentials and DIDs and just touch upon them a bit, but essentially, I would like a little bit closer to to that side of the fence, where I get a lot more control over my data, and essentially only I can see the most salient aspects of my personality, because I prefer that privacy and don't want everyone to be able to know everything about me without me wanting to let them know. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's my view on
Yeah.
the entire argument.
So definitely we're going to touch upon the pros and cons really of a soulbound implementation of identity versus let's say an off-chain version, or grounded on, let's say, verifiable credentials. But before that, I want to just run through possible use cases, right, of soulbound, just to give the audience some flavor of what is possible with the whole soulbound technology, right? So I mean, just right off the bat, the basics is the basic what you would think of, right? Academic credentials, work experience, all that can essentially be in the form of soulbounds. For example, like we mentioned earlier, the university can issue diploma as a soulbound NFT. um, and yeah, that would be your proof of your schooling and whatnot. And you can also take it to a micro level, where every class or every course you take issues a Soulbound NFT. So you're not reliant on, say, completing the entire educational course to really get that verification of learning, right? Which really doesn't make sense. You have to, like, if you finish one class, you should get that credit. So that's just one example. Then work experience, the same thing. Wherever your employer can issue Soulbounds basis any milestone you've achieved, so on and so forth. And then at a deeper level, you can then use these credentials to access loans, borrowing and lending, right? So like right now, everything is essentially collateralized, and over collateralized lending in Web3. But if you have robust credentialism, essentially, then we can. And I know there are experiments already going on with under collateralized and non collateralized lending and borrowing. But Soulbounds are trying to make this whole the whole stack of uncollateralized lending more sophisticated. Um, and also what this does is then it can, if you have soulbound tokens, which is essentially which is basically a proof of association with the community, right? Then what you can then access is community borrowing, which is basically, from what I understand, giving loans based on not the reputation of the individual, but the reputation of the collective, right? So that's a very interesting unlock with SPTs, right? Another one which which could could be possible is key recovery, right? So right now I know you can essentially give recovery powers to certain individuals, right? But with soulbound tokens and the aforementioned association with community, you can consider giving the community associated with key recovery powers. And all of this is important, is specifically possible because of that non-transferability. Because if you have that transferability, then the person may not necessarily be part of the community. He might have, like, for example, bought his way into it, or someone gifted it for whatever reason, but the person who holds it isn't really part of the community uh, for the right reasons, right? Or the reasons which will justify key recovery or credit worthiness, right? Next one is airdrops, like we spoke about earlier. Here we call it soul drops. But to your point, once again, that whole the whole concept of accepting or rejecting uh, is a design feature, but right now implementation, like the broader SBT space as a whole, is not. There's nothing set in stone. Um, Next, which is interesting, is how SPTs will improve governance, right? So now, I mean, the one token, one vote system is notorious for for not being very accurate in what the intent is supposed to be in any protocol's evolution. Um, but what's interesting is, and this really fascinated me, was if you have if you have SPTs, right? For members of a protocol, then you can first of all, you can see, right, the ideological affiliations to that individual. And if a lot of people who have similar ideological preferences are voting for one thing, and in another case you have a group of people which have diverse ideological expressions, um, and they are voting for another thing, you can make a case for the latter to be more to be the better route to take, um, right? Because essentially you're giving less weight to echo chambers, right? So if someone, I'm not sure if the idea got conveyed here, but what I'm trying to say is that if a group of people with the same perspectives are voting for X, and a group of diverse perspectives are voting for Y, then Y might be the more sound approach to take, right? To avoid herd mentality, groupthink, etc. Did that
And
did that
what's this in relation to, like, if, for example,
So
people are
like,
voting
so
with.
so so there are two governance proposals, for
Okay.
example, and you have one cohort of members voting for X, for proposal A, and
Yeah.
another voting for proposal Y.
Mm-hmm.
But the second cohort, because of, you can see their SBTs, right? And by function of that, you can see their ideologies.
Yeah.
They're more social.
You can see the perspectives, basically.
Yeah, you can see, you have a perspective of them which is non-financial, which is
Yeah,
more.
you can glean a lot of information about them from their soulbound tokens, because their soulbound tokens convey a lot of things about them.
Yeah,
And
in
you
terms
can
of your social
understand.
identity.
Exactly. So you can understand the diverse set of social identities that can be comprised for the people who are voting for proposal B, and you're saying that for the people who are voting for proposal A, they're all homogenous. So it's
So they
so,
might have the same
so
biases. You don't know,
exactly. So you
right?
can weight them differently in terms of the proposal.
Precisely.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep on coming back to the point that, like, you can do these things without soulbound tokens as well, and like you can do them, and you can do them with a reputation score, or essentially like pointers to off-chain data that convey the same information. But yeah, I think the concept itself is clear and it makes sense. I think that when you're going to try to implement these things, you're going to get into a design space that you have to call out the risks, and the risks are that people bias these voting decisions. Like, for example, if you constructed something like this, then there's a risk that you just ignore the perspectives of one group, because just because they're similar people, and just because they're similar doesn't mean that they should be weighted less. It doesn't mean anything like that. I mean, like, and who is the person making the decision? I think you kind of have to go towards the bottom layer of this. Who is the person who's making the decision that the voting of that the voting power of a group of people who are similar in perspective to each other should be less impactful than that of a group of people who are voting, who are more diverse in their thought process. I mean, that's also a decision at the end of the day, right? So I think that with these implementations, you have to be very careful, that in that you don't try to over engineer this too much, because if you do, then that's a kind of bias in itself.
Yeah, no, completely fair. And your first point on how you don't need soul bounds really to do this. I think these use cases which people are proposing as for soul bounds are really use cases for when you have a robust identity mechanism
Exactly.
on chain, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
I think that's exactly it. Like you hit the crux of that, where it's not soulbound versus non-soulbound or anything
yeah,
like that. It's just about having a composable on-chain identity.
correct, correct. No, fair point. I mean, that's something that has to be hashed out as the space evolves. But anyway, last one I want to touch upon, which I also found very interesting, is property rights. Right. So
Hmm.
right now we have NFTs, and the whole real estate world. There are experiments going on, where you can tokenize, say, a portion of real estate, and get and yield benefits. But right now, the 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 original real estate owner still holds a lot of fundamental rights, which, let's say, um, I mean, if you own a tokenized form of the real estate, you're technically are an owner, a partial owner, but you still don't inherit the rights of the original owner. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, if you own the token, um, in the current state of the implementations that are going on in terms of tokenized property rights, if you own the token, you don't have the right to, let's say, you know, uh, to lease that property out to someone else. The point being, I know there are a lot of like caveats here, but the point being that because the token itself is transferable, the original the real estate owner cannot 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 doesn't know the person you transfer it to. He might know you, and he might give you the permission to, let's say, lease it out to someone else, or let's say renovate the property. But if the token you hold is transferable and you transfer to someone else, then they don't the owner, real estate owner, doesn't know the third person, right? The person in the equation. But if we, let's say, use SBTs, non-transferable tokens, essentially, then if you have an SBT, you and of course the issuer is the real estate owner. So then you can make a case where you can inherit more set of fundamental rights in relation to the property. So this is another design whole space which is quite interesting in terms of the whole real estate industry and the intersection with it and Web3. So I found this pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Uh,
Just I think that these are, like there are definitely 100% use cases for soulbound tokens, for soulbound NFTs. It's not like there aren't. And I think that the real estate example is very interesting because, it's been the toughest nut to crack so
yeah,
far, because it was also one of the um, key use cases that people said, oh, when blockchain matures, oh, real estate's going to be supremely affected because, everyone can then have a lot more liquidity, this and that. And I mean, not panned out to date. And I think that's a lot because of regulation as well. So we're going to have to see, I think that on top of all of these things, right, you need to have a especially in terms of, in terms of, the way that, that this space pans out and the way that these identity systems are enforced, you're going to have a lot of you're going to have a legal wrapper on top of this, a regulatory wrapper on
yeah,
top of
yeah,
this. That is very important because because you can you can say that, oh, this is your identity and this is that and everything, but unless you need to have a legal framework that supports this, and all of these things, right, everything that you're talking about, they would represent substantial steps forward in terms of identity, in terms of how we, in terms of how we interact with each other as humans. But also, it is not going to be possible to do it without a regulatory angle and a regulatory wrapper built on top of it. So, I think that this will evolve, but it's going to take time to evolve because I mean regulators right now are still coming to grips with what digital assets themselves are, and I don't think that they're going to be anywhere close to understanding what soulbound tokens and soulbound NFTs are. I mean, like imagine some 70-year-old 70-year-old politician trying to grasp the concept from World of Warcraft. I mean,
Oh
stuff
God.
enough as it is. And I think that in order for them to understand these things, there needs to be a lot of education that happens from the base, and there need to be a lot of people who are able to help them understand what the implications of these concepts are. So it's all well and good to say, oh, we can do this and we can do that, and move fast and break things, even though I don't think that that's what Vitalik's trying to do at all. He's actually, in my opinion, very measured. But you like the point that I'm trying to get to is in five simple words, you need a regulatory wrapper. That's it.
Yeah, no, fair point. And real estate is actually one of those spaces which are the real estate, sorry, the regulatory, the proportion of regulation in just say navigating the space is substantial.
Hmm.
Um, and if you
So
go,
much red tape.
yeah, and if you go to, towards the more from the developed world to the developing world, it just gets more and more complicated, right? Like India, for example, so much regulation which is not even which is not even sound, in the sense it's not formalized, it's very informal. So like a new regulation just pops up
Yeah.
without anyone knowing. So it's hard to plan for such events. But yeah, fair point. I mean, all of this stuff seems a while out, but
Yeah.
interesting to ponder on
Oh,
what the
definitely. I mean, the concepts theoretically are very, they challenge your brain and make you think
yeah,
in a variety of different angles, right? Like, oh, what if, you can't revoke it? What if you can't, what if you can't accept it and it just lands up in your wallet? I mean,
yeah,
like, what I don't want people spamming my wallet with random crap. Like, honestly, I don't want people just issuing me things without my permission. I don't think that that's the way to go for sure, actually. That's the design aspect that I can't get behind at all, where people just issue me things without my approval. But
yeah.
but that key aspect of my approval, if
Hmm.
if that's there, then that's I think a very important unlock
Yeah.
for this space as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is a good time to then now just jump into what other cons, pros and cons are there for this technology. One, you rightfully said, to have that agency to be able to accept or reject um, uh, soul drop tokens, or any tokens for that matter. Um, that's one. Then another one we touched on earlier was privacy, right? Once you have a certain token, a soulbound token, what do you want to reveal? What do you not want to reveal? You might not want to reveal, let's say, medical history, right? But say an affiliation with, I don't know, like an artist or whatever sports team, you might want to. So that whole structure and construct has to be has to be really formalized, because, and the reason I put this as a con is because privacy as a concept in crypto, it is I mean, it exists in terms of cryptography, but if you look at it through the lens of the public ledger, the whole point of it is for it to be accessible to everyone. So in a way, it's not supposed to be private, right? So there are different layers to it, but the fact that people, the industry as a whole wants this open ledger that everyone has access to, everyone can vet. They want to have provenance dating back to, let's say, the Genesis block, right? Makes it tough to enforce privacy natively, right? In terms of, I mean, of course, a better person to have this conversation with is a developer himself, or a researcher. But these things of privacy, transferability, to really enforce them in the code, is something which even Vitalik alludes to in that conversation you mentioned, right? That it still has to be figured out. So that has to be, so currently that's why I'm mentioning it as a con. Next is Sbt farming, right? people can, if there is a, in a way, SBTs are quantifiable measures of identity, right? You're adding some sort of metric to what your identity is. Like, I have 4 SBTs from X community, so therefore I am akin to the characteristics of these community, right? So you can really engineer identities, and of course it makes it harder because soulbound tokens are by design, you know uh, or are promised to be, issued more sparingly, to really avoid that whole, you know uh, uh, the whole idea of being able to buy it. You have to really work to get the SPT, and that's the whole point of it, right? To to be a, not a final arbitrator, but a reliable source of whatever the SPT is trying to communicate. But either way, people with resources can engineer identities, and really pursue the activities to get these soulbound tokens, even though they are not truly, you know, a reflection of the soulbound tokens. And they could have motives, could be anything really, could be any. I mean, they could have, they could harm an individual, or they could, have some philosophical misalignment with the group they want to mimic. It could be anything. um, One thing that is interesting is, uh, okay, so this is I'll start with the opposite. So one thing that Vitalik mentions is on why soulbounds are good, right? Is because you can prove negatives. What he means by this is that you can prove that you don't have something. So where this is useful is, say you want to prove that, that you're a good citizen, let's say, and you can do that by saying I don't have a criminal record. And you can, with soulbounds, you can prove that you don't have a criminal record. Whereas for, let's say, an off-chain identifier, what you're mostly doing is proving by what you have. So if you want to prove that you're a good citizen, then you have to prove it by XYZ things. I mean, you could, on top of my mind, maybe you can prove it by saying that you've donated X amount of money to some charity, right? But if you can prove by negatives, um, it's more accessible to, let's say, the people who don't have proper documentation. For example, people
Wait,
who are from low income families.
do you want to, I'm not sure if fully understood that. Do you want to like go through that,
Yeah.
that example from like the top down? I think that if you just, yeah, if you just structure that, I think I
So
was vaguely getting what you were trying to say, but yeah, if you don't mind going at that again.
yeah, so see, one of the ways soulbounds really, help prove a particular part of your identity is by by verifying negatives, proving negatives. Now what that means is proving something that you don't have, as opposed to proving something that you have. Like soulbound tokens, um like say if you have, um oh sorry, no, this is my mistake. This is for on-chain identifiers, something that's on-chain, right? So it could be, soulbound tokens is an example of on-chain. That's why the topic came into be. But once you have on-chain identifiers as opposed to off-chain identifiers, right? Once you have on-chain identifiers, you can prove something by something that you don't have. For example, you can write a script which goes through everything that all your identity items, soulbound tokens, whatever else it may be, and you can say that does XYZ exist, and if XYZ doesn't exist, that means you've proved that you don't have XYZ, right? So now if you don't have a criminal record, and if you want to prove that you're a good citizen, then you can essentially, for someone who has a who say someone who's just come into the country, migrated, low income, who doesn't have the proper documentation, they get access to whatever utility or service provider service they want, which all you need is, say, you have to be a good citizen. I don't know if this concept is coming clear. We can put this explanation in the show notes. I think that might be a better way to explain this, because this is quite interesting. This is
Yeah,
one of
I
the
think let me try and summarize what you're saying, right?
yeah,
So essentially what you're saying is that on-chain identifiers allow you to prove that you are something by looking at what you are not. So for example,
exactly.
you are a good citizen because you do not have a criminal record. You are a supporter of Chelsea because you are not a supporter of United. I don't know, maybe that's wrong. But essentially what it does is it allows you to prove negatives. And um and but, but but what I still don't understand is what does that, like, yeah, sure, like it allows you to prove something that you are not, and
Mhm.
it puts you into into like one camp or one area. Um but what I'm not fully understanding what the what the entire point of that is, like, in the sense that, okay, you can prove that you don't have a criminal record. You can prove that you aren't on some sort of register or whatever. You can prove like a lot of different types of things that you are not, and the constellation of those things that you are not, is that what defines your is that what defines your standing? Is like for example, if a company is looking for someone trustworthy to hire, they will look at everything that a person is not, like, like when you're writing down let's say that you're filling out some form, and in that form it says, oh, I've never been convicted of criminal activity, I've never been I've never gone to I've never served in the armed forces, something like that, like, I've never done this, I've never done that. So you're essentially saying that this is an analogous thing that to that. So it essentially says a company can check for all the things that you are not by looking at your on-chain identifiers, and essentially say, oh, okay, this person meets my criteria because they are not any of these bad things. So for just in a very base level example, but obviously this can be extended to other sorts of use cases as well.
Yeah, and you're right. But I feel like a more appropriate example of where this would be useful, as opposed to for something, let's say someone's hiring someone, is more in terms of products or service. Like if you're a company who wants to sell a product or a service, then your judge of character is much lower than when you're like hiring someone, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't, like, you care less about a lot more things. So here is something where a basic check of this sort, of say like a very basic check of, if you're not a criminal or whatever, gets becomes handy. And
Okay, I've got it. So I think that essentially what you're saying is that using your on-chain identifiers and proving what you are not, you can see whether you are in the target audience of a company that is trying to, sell you products or services, and they don't get access to all the, like today, like they have some access to so much data about us, and they can analyze it through, big data sets and all of those kinds of things. What this allows you to do instead is that it allows them to check what you are not, and what band you belong in, what group you belong in, and rather than like looking at specific data about you, they look at, oh, this person is not this, not that, not that, but they don't see like anything specific about you,
yep,
and then
yep.
that's why they can target you better, and it like preserves privacy as well.
Yeah, it's a very strong method of privacy preservation, as well as it disincentivizes discrimination. Because if the whole idea of filtering by particular things, like instead of saying that they don't have XYZ thing, therefore they come into our target. If you do that, versus if you do that, they have XYZ, and that's why they if they have sorry if they don't have something, then they come into our audience, versus if they have something, they come to audience, in our audience. The second method allows you to really hyper discriminate in a way. You can
Maybe
it's
that's the wrong word. Let's not call it hyper discriminate, but be more selective with essentially your targeting, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, hyper discriminate is a very negative word. Don't want to call
Yeah,
it that. But essentially, yeah, it allows you to be a lot more pinpoint with your with your
yeah.
targeting, I guess.
I mean, this again is a design choice for whichever application ends up whichever different applications for identity really gets developed. But these possibilities are quite interesting,
Yeah.
and will determine if the on-chain identifier is going to be advantageous, disadvantageous, to what set of users,
Yeah, so
right?
let me just try and like, bring this to life a little bit and help
Hmm.
the audience understand how this could practically work, because this seems very theoretical right now.
Yeah,
But
it is.
imagine a world in which everyone has on-chain identifiers. Now, everyone doesn't know what exactly those on-chain identifiers are, but maybe they build up to like a reputation score, or maybe they essentially are a list of all the things that the person is, but they're not, automatically visible to everyone. But when a company, for example, and let's say that everyone in the world has these identifiers, and when a company, for example, let's say, you're Sainsbury's, you're trying to essentially understand who you should be targeting your ads towards. Now, in today's world, what you would do is that you would use social listening tools, you would use big data sets, you would try to also if you're like a social media company or something, gather all the information about your about the person, and then sell it on to advertisers, and that's the business model. But like what we're suggesting could happen in the future is that all these companies, rather than looking at very minute data about your life, they could actually look at your on-chain identifiers, the data that you're comfortable with, the data that you're comfortable with sharing with other people, and and essentially use that data um, to to essentially run different types of queries on it. So is this, to find from like this whole sea of on-chain identifiers, who are the people who meet this category, who are the people who meet category A, B, C, D, E, and these are the categories that we are targeting as an organization. And then we can target their wallet addresses with advertisements or with products or whatever like that, and maybe make it, and in a utopia, maybe make it non-invasive, maybe compensate them in the way that the Brave browser does for that time, and for the access to their on-chain identifiers that allows you to give them more targeted pinpoint advertising. So this could be a method in which these on-chain identifiers act as a privacy preserving mechanism, while also being a method for more pinpointed interactions with companies and communities. Did I summarize that okay?
Yeah, no, yeah. The only caveat I'll make is the pinpointing from a advertiser point of view will be less.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll be more weighted towards privacy preservation.
So it would be a better balance than what we have right now. Maybe
Correct.
it won't be as
Definitely.
pinpointed in the sense that, oh, I think about like, socks, and then the next thing I see on Instagram is like, some ducks on socks or something like that. It'll be, it won't be exactly like that, but it will be, relevant to you, the advertising, because because what they are using in that data to understand whether they should be targeting you is a list of things that you are and you are not.
Hmm.
Even though they don't know the minute details of that. So let's say on like a scale of 1 to 10, the advertising today is pinpointed at like 9, and the privacy is like a 3. And in tomorrow's world, the privacy will be like a 7, and the advertising and the pinpointedness of the advertising will be a 7 or a 6.
Yep. 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 No, that. I think that's a good example to really um,
Bring this to life.
yeah, like really make it easier to visualize,
Hmm.
because I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, everything here is so theoretical, and I was actually quite surprised when I was doing my research on how theoretical the theoretical phase everything is in right now, as opposed to already being live. Um, but yeah, so let me just. So I mean, we have like other pros and cons. For example, with SBTs, the reputation can't be sold really to the highest bidder, right? These are because of the non-transferability. Then you have, to a certain degree, you have civil resistance in the sense people can't just make fake IDs, fake identities easily. But to the counter of that is, like I mentioned, the SBT farming that allows it, but it just makes it more difficult. Um, and but yeah, so and of course, then you have provenance and but that's hand in hand with NFTs, right? Uh, once NFTs part, when a wallet holds an NFT, then you can see who holds it and where it's come from earlier. So that's not specific to soulbound tokens, but they get that feature as a derivative of being an NFT. Um, so yeah, so that I think that covers the main pros and cons. I think we touched upon privacy, transferability, agency, um, and those and the whole in terms of data, the more niche the examples of the aforementioned fundamental pros and cons. Um, but yeah, so the one thing that I'll conclude on this with is, because this is a novel technology and because you can just do a lot more, there are going to be uh, you know detrimental implementations of the technology in society. I mean, there's no denying that, right? Like how we mentioned, how I mentioned hyper discrimination, right? So the fact that this new technology exists doesn't mean it's going to be, it doesn't necessarily mean it will uh, you know have an overwhelming positive effect or overwhelming negative effect. It depends on the it depends on us how we utilize it. um, but what we mustn't do is just disregard the technology, even though it has potential to have detrimental effects. I mean, this goes for any technology. It goes for all the way from steam engines to electricity to cars, all the way to internet, smartphones, right? Social media. Um, so the same thing applies to Soulbounds um, and the broader crypto space. So that's one thing that that I think everyone should keep in mind. And and just to conclude, and I'm like I'm sure the audience has realized, it's still to be decided how everything's going to look in practice. Um, the one point that I personally find pretty important to change, at least right off the bat, is the nomenclature, because it's so it has to be less technophile. Everything, like the concept of soul bounds and souls,
Yeah,
like
it
I don't
definitely, yeah.
like it seems too far-fetched for it to become mainstream lexicon, and of course another
I think
concept.
that that's actually a super important point that you've touched upon there. Like I think we need to be a lot more, lot less complex with our terminology.
Yeah.
We need to make it easier for people to understand what they're signing up to. Like, come on. Like I think Vitalik's an extremely intelligent person, but he's also a very technical. Like I mean, he's very
Yeah.
technologically focused. He's not.
Yeah.
It's not like he's not a marketing expert. He's just saying these things because this is how he contextualizes, frames them, and creates mental models. And I don't think that that's a wrong thing at all to do. But I think that to get into the mainstream and to stop everyone from treating people treating this as like, oh, just another idea that the crypto bros threw out. Um, I think that like it needs to be a lot more palatable to the general community, because you want people to understand these things, and because it's important concepts, and you don't want to lose that just because you've couched it in some World of Warcraft terminology, or something that's a little too esoteric and difficult to understand and grasp at the first go. So I think I think that this marketing problem that Web3 has, this, this entire issue with people thinking that, oh, it's just scammy and like random stuff, and there's nothing good that comes out of it. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with terminology and how people perceive the builders and the evangelists of Web3 as well, because it's and that's just like a broader point in general that I'm discussing right now, but it is related to soulbound tokens as well, because they do contribute to this entire image and the stereotype. And I think that and in order to fully get people to embrace the technology and what it brings about, because the technology itself is revolutionary. You need to actually you need to get people to s- let go of their preconceptions
Yeah.
and their misconceptions, maybe, that this is just this is just a plaything of some crypto bros who are just coding stuff in their free time or like in their entire lives. I don't know, right? But I think that this is an important thing that we need to get past as an industry.
Yeah, no, definitely. And first impressions are important. And to me, at least, when I found out that, you know, that these tokens are called soul bound and the wallets that contain them are called souls, it just felt really creepy, man. It's like I don't think the regular person would, be willing to spend 2-3 minutes trying to understand this.
Yeah, they
Especially,
just go like, oh, what is soul bound, soul drops, like, oh, your souls are linked. Like,
yeah,
it just
yeah,
seems so airy fairy.
yeah,
Let's make it a little more,
yeah. It's more approachable.
approachable. Yeah, approachable. Exactly. That's the right word.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so that's one of the open points that that I found to be less discussed um, in my during my research. And secondly, of course, in terms of regulatory backlash, or no back, I don't know. That is to be seen. But as soon as the the actual implementations go live, that's only when we'll see how regulation responds. But that's another big area of an unknown area, which has to be looked at. And yeah, and I think overall, this whole broader vision of decentralized society, it's going to be an iterative process. It's not going to be like, oh, we have soulbound tokens, and now we have decentralized society. It's going to be, trial and error, like how perfectly how DeFi is, was and is, right, how it's evolving. You have DeFi 1, DeFi 2, and God knows what we'll have next. So I think I think this will be even more so because it has a very high social angle to it, right?
Exactly.
And
Social, cultural,
yeah,
privacy. Like DeFi is like one thing, and DeFi is, DeFi also divides opinion, but I don't think that I don't think that DeFi would divide opinion as much as something like a soul-bound token
yeah,
would.
definitely, because I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, at after a point, numbers are numbers. It's black and white. But humans with their points of view, and likes and dislikes are very subjective, and they're subject to change all the time. So something which a group might be willing to implement today, they might not be willing to implement tomorrow. But in DeFi, if you take X risk to earn Y yield, chances are if the deal's good, it's going to be the people are going to be take that deal 10 years down the line, 20 years down, 100 years down the line. I mean, idea being low risk, high reward. No, that's never going to change. That's never going to change, right? But yeah, so one last thing I'll touch upon is, and this, the authors of the paper, the paper we mentioned earlier, also stand by, and I completely echo the sentiment, is we don't need a perfect system to give this time and attention. We just need one better than the current system.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly. And I think that these are all incremental improvements. I mean, I think that this is more than an incremental improvement. I think that this opens up the door for a lot of, this is a base level improvement that can open up the door for a lot of use cases. But yeah, it remains to be seen how it gets implemented, and, what some of the key design decisions that the people who are developing this take, because that will dictate how the adoption will be, and that'll dictate the public response to it as well. So I can't stress enough how important the marketing around this is, because if Web3 wants to mature and get into, become the next the way that the internet is constructed based on the pure ideals of what Web3 espouses to be, then the marketing needs to improve, because people just do
yeah,
not understand what's going on right now, and people are very skeptical and think that it's all just a big scam. So I think that that needs to be something that definitely improves.
yep. No, I think that's absolutely correct, and I think that's a good place to conclude this conversation. There's nothing else from my side. Anything you want to end on?
No, I think that's all good. I think that's this has been a very interesting discussion, theoretical, but also, we've tried to explore the practicality of soulbound tokens and take them apart a little bit, as well as a concept, because that's what we're trying to do, right? Like, we don't have one single opinion on this. We're not saying, oh, this is the best or this is the worst. We're just trying to analyze it critically, and yeah, I think that it's a worthwhile exercise to do, even though this is a ways down the line. But yeah, I think that's it from me. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Cheers.
Yeah.